It is truly a great honor and an enormous pleasure to become the president of the Association of American Law Schools. I was looking at the list of the amazing individuals who have preceded me in this role, and I feel like the answer to the Sesame Street game, which of these doesn't belong? I want to take a moment and thank my predecessor, Vince Rougeau, for his wonderful leadership and extraordinary service. I've had the great pleasure of serving with Vince on the executive committee of the AALS for several years, including last year when he was president. Vince is invariably wise and calm, even if at times the discussion becomes heated. He was a terrific leader for the organization in a very difficult year. It was extraordinary that he continued to serve as president, even after in the middle of the year, he took on the huge responsibilities of being the president of the College of the Holy Cross. I will do my best this year as president of AALS to live up to the outstanding example that Vince has set for all who will follow him in this role. I also want to take a moment and thank the superb executive director of the AALS, Judy Erwin, and its outstanding staff. I very much look forward to working together in the year ahead. The tradition of the AALS is that each year the president chooses a theme to help shape the next year's conference, as well as the work of the sections and more generally of the AALS. I have chosen as my theme, how law schools can make a difference. I have been teaching now for over 40 years. I have never seen my students so discouraged. They see a country that has lost faith in the institutions of government. The last two presidents, Trump and Biden, each have had approval ratings not much above 40%. The Supreme Court's approval ratings are at the lowest in American history. The September Gallup poll showed only 40% approve of the court's performance and 53% disapprove. Congress' approval rating is the lowest of all at about 18, and I worry that it is 18 people, not 18%. My students see a political system that is broken. Repeated opinion polls show that 70% of Republican voters believe that the election was stolen from Donald Trump, and that includes some of our students. They see how 19 states have adopted laws designed to make it more difficult for voters of color to cast their ballots. They're watching how partisan gerrymandering is occurring with a vengeance across the country, making it ever less likely to have fair elections. Many see a Supreme Court that is profoundly conservative and remain that way throughout their careers. After all, Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who was a hero to many of our students, was replaced by Justice Amy Coney Barrett, who cannot be more different ideologically. Barrett was 48 years old when she was sworn in on Monday, October 26, 2020. If Barrett remains on the court until she is 87, the age which Justice Ginsburg died, Barrett will be a justice into the year 2059. Of course, the shift in the court is celebrated by our conservative students and colleagues, but the ideological divide among students and faculty in their views of the court never has been greater. Indeed, the only thing about which there seems to be a consensus is that American society and the world are facing unprecedented dangers. Climate change threatens the planet and all life on it. There's been a rise in authoritarian governments in many countries around the world. The racial reckoning reminds us of the ongoing, deeply embedded racial inequalities in the United States. Tremendous inequalities exist in terms of access to justice. The events of late 2020 and early 2021, including almost exactly a year ago on January 6th, reveal the fragility of American democracy. It is in this context that I've chosen the theme for the AALS, a focus on what law schools can do to make a difference in these and other areas. My hope is that all of us, liberal or conservative, can agree that change is essential and that law schools must make a positive difference. My request and my challenge to those who are planning programs at AALS for next year's conference, to the work of AALS sections, to my fellow deans and to my fellow law teachers, is to focus on what we as academics, as leaders in matters of law, and as law schools can do to bring about positive change. It would be impossible and presumptuous of me to answer the question that I've just posed, but I certainly can outline some of the things that we might do. This needs to include what we teach, including perhaps changing the content of existing courses and creating new ones. Many law schools now have added classes, even required ones, on race and the law, and on topics such as climate change. It perhaps should include gently urging more of our colleagues to focus their scholarship on the hardest issues and what can be done. It certainly can include the conferences and symposia as we gather thought leaders on matters of law. It certainly must include enhanced support for public service and pro bono work by students and by faculty. Such work can make a huge difference in people's lives and in facilitating social change. As deans and as law teachers, we must do pro bono work, including be a model for our students. As institutions, we must find more ways to encourage and to support this work. My hope, too, is that law schools will expand their focus to include building better pipelines to the legal profession as we prepare the next generation of leaders. A few years ago, the AALS did a groundbreaking study before the JD, which was based on a survey of over 22,000 college students. It found that 55% of law students considered going to law school even before college, and that of undergraduates considering law school, half have at least one parent with an advanced degree. This means that if we're to increase the diversity of law schools in every way, we must reach out to students in junior high school and high school, as well as in college. I am the first in my family to go to college, and I care deeply about AALS in law schools, finding ways to support and build better pipeline programs. As I reflect on the theme that I have chosen and the challenge that I've presented here today, I realize that central to all of this is the basic question we must all face. How do we go about bringing about positive change? Again, for this issue, it'd be impossible and presumptuous of me to write answers, but I can share some thoughts. First, we must recognize that change is more likely to occur in an incremental way than in a single dramatic event. A magical moment when the law and society are dramatically altered makes for great movies and television, but it doesn't work that way in practice. Consider as an example one of the most important advances of liberty and equality in recent years, the recognition of a constitutional right to marriage equality for gays and lesbians. It's tempting to think that it happened all at once when the Supreme Court decided Obergefell versus Hodges on June 26, 2015. But that would be mistaken. In 1986, the court handed down an important decision, Bowers versus Hardwick, which held that states could prohibit private, consensual, adult, same-sex sexual activity. There had to be a concerted effort to overturn that decision, which happened 17 years later in Lawrence versus Texas in 2003. In the meantime, social attitudes began to change, no doubt aided by TV shows like Will and Grace and movies like The Kids Are All Right. In that same year, 2003, lawyers won the first major case declaring unconstitutional a state prohibition of same-sex marriage. The Massachusetts Supreme Judicial Court found that the Massachusetts law requiring that marriage be between a man and a woman violated the Massachusetts state constitution. By litigating in state court under state law, there was no chance that the matter could go to the Supreme Court, which certainly was not ready to recognize a right to same-sex marriage. Litigation then proceeded state by state in state courts. There were successes in states like Iowa and California, but also failures in places like New York. Meanwhile, some states adopted legislation to allow same-sex marriage, and in some states, voters passed initiatives to do so. The result was that by 2015, when the issue came to the Supreme Court, same-sex marriage was already allowed in much of the country. I choose same-sex marriage as my example because it is the most rapid instance of major change in my lifetime. We went as a society for no states allowed marriage equality for gays and lesbians in 2003 to one where it was a constitutional right in every state just 12 years later. But even here, it happened incrementally, step by step, with triumphs and setbacks. Second, multiple actors and institutions are required for effective legal and social change. Never does major social change come from one institution acting by itself. For an example here, I want to focus on the end of Jim Crow and the laws that mandated segregation of the races. When I was born in 1953, every southern state, many border states, and southern parts of northern states had laws that segregated every aspect of life. As we all know, Black and white babies had to be born in separate hospitals, play in separate playgrounds, drink from separate water fountains, use separate bathrooms, attend separate schools, and eat in separate restaurants. Such laws had existed for decades and were upheld by the Supreme Court's pernicious separate but equal doctrine. How did this change? It took organizing and grassroots efforts, such as lunch counter sit-ins. It took litigation, including Brown versus Board of Education, decided by the Supreme Court on May 17, 1954. It took Congress adopting the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which, among other things, prohibits hotels and restaurants from discriminating and outlawed employment discrimination based on race, sex, and religion. None of this, of course, is to deny the tremendous racial inequalities that remain in American society, but it does show how progress requires organizing and litigating and legislating. Third, to bring about change, we must build coalitions, including with those with whom we disagree. No group is powerful enough to bring about change by itself. The coalition that brought about progressive federal laws like Social Security, Medicare, Head Start, resulted from a strange combination of Northern liberals, Southern Democrats, and liberal Republicans. I worry that the greater ideological purity of the parties will make coalition building much more difficult. Until the recent election of 2 Democratic senators from Georgia, Southern Democrats were a thing of the past. Liberal, even moderate Republicans are non-existent. The greater polarization in society makes coalition building harder than ever. But I have no doubt that if it will be a successful effort to lessen the urgent problem of, say, climate change, it will take a coalition. Fourth, major changes are difficult, take time, and there will be setbacks. Civil rights lawyer Connie Rice titled her autobiography, "Power Yields Nothing." I think of the efforts to end slavery, to secure the right to vote to women, to end child labor. All took decades, but ultimately happened. I think now of the fight to ratify the Equal Rights Amendment. It was passed overwhelmingly by the House and the Senate in 1972. Passage by 3/4 of the states seemed certain then. But by 1979, it was 3 states short of the 38 needed for ratification. Congress extended time for ratification for 3 years. But even after that period of time, it did not have the necessary 38 states. Now, finally, 2 years ago, Virginia became the 38th state to ratify the ERA. There's still a battle to get Congress to recognize this and the Archivist of the United States to deem it part of the Constitution. But as I speak to you today, I'm convinced it will happen, and there will be a point, hopefully soon, which the ERA is deemed to be ratified. The reality is that every action has a reaction. The Supreme Court's decision in Brown unleashed massive resistance to desegregation. Fifth, change happens only where there are courageous people to fight for it. We must inspire our students to be those who will bring about that change. Think of all of the major social legal movements that I have described or alluded to, such as abolition of slavery, women's suffrage, the end of Jim Crow. For each we can identify, we must study those who dedicated their lives to working for justice. In the area of civil rights, there's men like Thurgood Marshall and women like Constance Baker Motley, who fought tirelessly for racial justice. That progress would not have happened without them. And they are the role models for all of us and for our students. I began talking about our students very discouraged right now. We, as educators, must give them hope, but it cannot be false hope. I think that the hope comes from the reality that American history and world history show tremendous advances of equality and freedom. Racial inequalities in this country remain severe, but it's not what it was in 1787 or 1868 or 1953. Gender equalities, of course, persist, but there have been advances. Today, the entering class of my law school is 2/3 women. And as I said, it is just 6.5 years ago that there can be a right marriage equality for gays and lesbians. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. got it exactly right when he said that the arc of the moral universe is long and it bends towards justice. And it is our duty as law schools to focus on how we can make that change happen. That is my request, my challenge, and my theme for my year as president of the AALS.